Fire Emblem Engage is one of the games that gets one of the worst reps across the series, and I really don't understand why. In this video, I'm going to try to cover a couple of aspects of this game in contrast with some other games in order to show you why Fire Emblem Engage is actually peak Fire Emblem, and that you're really over-hating on it even though it's giving you exactly what you wanted. The game that I think relates the most to Fire Emblem Engage is probably going to be Fire Emblem Fates. It's one of the main points of argument, is always like, well, Fates has bad story, but good gameplay. And Fire Emblem Engage kind of falls under that category too. And as we know today, Fates is probably one of the most adored games in the series, with people replaying it multiple times, multiple Iron Man challenges, people really praising its uniqueness in terms of its skills and combinations and how people were allowed to basically kind of sandbox the game, but still maintain difficulty and find new things to talk about many years in the future. This brings me to the first point of this, which is Fire Emblem Engage probably has some of the best customization I've ever seen in Fire Emblem, period. Three Houses had a lot of customization, but there was a big argument about the fact that all the units started to feel really samey. And what do I mean by this? At some point, people started figuring out that Wyvern Lords are just the best units in the game, or some of the best units in the game, along with also Bow Knights and classes that have big range. The mages also all come down to, hey, can Gremory warp 3 or 4 times? It's probably better. So it came down to this repetitiveness of classes and not a lot of different combinations regarding that at all. Because of this, units lost a little bit of their identity, with things like Lysithea wearing big armor, or Felix being a magician, or just things in general that didn't really match the personality of the characters that you had. It was good for customization, sure, but a lot of units wound up in the same category and it didn't really satisfy that experience. There was also a lot of complaints about the monastery and how long and complicated it was to get units going, but that it was an intrinsic part of the gameplay itself. Fire Emblem Engage went and cut this down by a significant margin by using the Somnio, which in my opinion is a much more efficient and faster way to get across the message of customizing your units. There are some things you still have to do or should do, but it's not nearly as bad or as time consuming as the monastery was. Let me tell you, if you decided to play Engage and just swap the main emblems around without ever changing the characters' classes, you would still have a total of 432 possible combinations to deal with during the game. You would have to play the game a total of 30 to 32 times in order to see all these combinations. That's absolutely insane! We're not even taking into consideration class changes, just the main cast along with the emblem swapping. You add in class changes and then you have even more combinations that are possible. And the interesting part is that class changes come later in the part of the game in which the units already kind of have shown their identity, so you really don't have that feeling that everybody's the same. You have like these unique kind of roles and people kind of pigeonhole themselves into these roles, but they can also spread out depending on their stat line and what you want to do, which I think is way better than what Three Houses did. Balancing for the first time in Fire Emblem also isn't absolutely horrendous. In Engage, the units actually feel kind of well balanced. Yeah, of course, there's like some juggernauts that are better than others and whatnot, but for the most part, no unit is completely unusable. Put in a little bit of effort or change around their emblems or basically organize how you want them to operate. This actually pleases both casual players and veteran players because it allows you to basically identify quickly which are the units that are kind of really good and optimize through there, or you can just play with your favorites and get it done anyway, even on the highest difficulty, which is something I think is fantastic and should be implemented more often. I really like the maps in Fire Emblem Engage as well. I think they're some of the most well thought out maps in the entirety of the series. Every single story map feels like there is an attempt to challenge you or to make it harder or to make you use a different aspect, and at the same time, there's also enough solutions to the problem through the emblem usage that you actually don't feel like you're pigeonholed into one single response. I don't need a Juggernaut just with Marcus. I don't need to rush the boss really quick. There are other ways to handle things. I can warp skip. I can just enemy face bondage shield. I can move up with the whole group and do hit and run tactics. There's so many ways to handle Engage that I think that that's really cool in terms of map design. And ironically though, I feel that the paralogs are at their weakest. This is funny because Engage is actually at its weakest map design wise when it's trying to emulate previous Fire Emblem games. Mostly this is due to the fact that a lot of those maps are just kill boss. And the kill boss map conditions are for better or for worse, they're kind of really designed to make you just rush the boss and kill them really quick and end the map. So there are ways around that you quickly figure out so you can kind of trivialize the map. And those, I will say, are not the best design things, but they're still okay. Last but not least, we have to talk about the emblems. The emblems are the core of the gameplay. They're basically everything. If you're playing Fire Emblem Engaged without being engaged, you're not playing the game. The experience of the game heavily requires on how you operate with these emblems and how you decide to utilize them throughout your playthrough. If you're not really taking advantage of this or not playing with the customization options, you're not really playing Fire Emblem Engage. You're kind of just going through a classic experience of Fire Emblem and you're missing out on the best parts of it, which are these possible combinations and the replayability value of that as well. So, if we've established that the map designs are great, the units are balanced, the combat system is great, and even the engage mechanic is one of the best mechanics I've ever seen, then what is really wrong with Fire Emblem Engage? I think Fire Emblem Engage's biggest problem is not even its story, it's actually the way it presents itself. And what do I mean by this? Fire Emblem is usually known as a series that has this anime-esque type of feel, but at the same time, it heavily leans onto medieval fantasy, which is what the majority of the games up to this point have really been about. Even when you take a unit like Perry, who has that kind of clownish makeup going on, she's still in a class and has armor and has gauntlet and is in a game that is predominantly kind of medievalish in its core. Fire Emblem Engage kind of takes you out of that by inserting some really bright colors and some really different designs that feel like anime characters just pop straight out of the TV screen into the game. For lack of a better word, Fire Emblem Engage is too bright. It's too lighthearted and carefree with its design. The units do even go through dark struggles, but the thematic consistency of the struggles is really hard to contrast regarding what you're seeing on the screen. An example for Lumera's death scene kind of falls into this category. It's supposed to be dark and a sad moment, but the characters are so bright and everything is just so kind of cheerful in its presentation that it doesn't really feel like that. Meaning that the thematic consistency of that medievalish kind of Game of Thrones style is gone. And this is a pretty significant departure when you take into consideration the other Fire Emblems that we've been playing so far. I don't fault players for not liking this new presentation. It is kind of jarring, especially if you're more used to playing the older ones that have this bigger like aspect of medieval fantasy applied. Three Houses does this pretty well, so does even Fire Emblem 7 or Fire Emblem 4. They all in general have this core feeling locked down. But Fire Emblem Engage with this big pivot in this presentation kind of really throws a lot of people off. I will say this though, do not let this presentation fool you. Give it a shot. Play the game. Try to really embrace all the emblems. Yeah, skip the supports, skip the conversations, whatever. Try to enjoy it as a tactics game, which is what it actually is. Try to focus on the aspect of how you're going to solve maps and strategize around them. The story is not the best, I will agree, but it's definitely not any worse than the average cookie cutter story that we've gotten from Fire Emblem so far. It's actually very similar in a lot of points. In conclusion, I think Fire Emblem Engage is actually peak. It did a lot of things that lovers of the series have been asking for a very long time. But because of the way that it's presented, it actually kind of shies people away from that experience so they don't get to enjoy it completely. It's almost like what you're watching and what you're playing doesn't match the experience you want to feel. So there's a disconnect there that severely affects the outcome of players' enjoyment in terms of what they're experiencing. But take a look at it objectively, and I guarantee you, this is going to be basically Fates 2.0. People in a couple of years from now are going to be saying like, oh my god, Fire Emblem Engage was the best thing ever! And they're going to talk about all the different combinations that were possible and everything that you could do and how it was way ahead of its time in terms of gameplay and of an experience delivered to the tactician that really empowers and makes you a better player. So what did you guys think? Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Please let me know down in the comments below. I'm really excited to see your takes on this. How did you feel about Fire Emblem Engage? Don't forget to like and subscribe. I really do appreciate it. It helps the channel out a lot. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.